All right. Well, welcome back to my video blog, and it is search for Forrest Fenn's Gold. I think my sound is turned up enough here. So today I wanted to go back to a topic that I was trying to, and I did spend a bunch of time on, but basically it's on the clues, uh, and I'm sort of going backwards on this. Not backwards, but I'm reviewing this. And so some of the things I think are really important is in the 2013 interview, Forrest Fenn, and I believe it's the New Zealand interview. Some of the highlights are I think really things that I just keep finding intriguing about that interview are related to where Forrest Fenn talks about the clues. And he says, and forgive me if I don't have every word in place because I guess you could say I'm paraphrasing, but basically this is from my notes. And Forrest Fenn says something to the extent of, you need to decipher the clues and figure out what they mean, and that will lead, and then you can go right straight to the treasure. But the thing I want to focus on is he's saying you need to decipher the clues and figure out what they mean. And that is a compound sentence. It's two things. He's saying, and the reason why I'm kind of harping on this and repeating and kind of going back to it is because one of the biggest problems with trying to figure out the thrill of the chase is that, and it was a video from like a year ago, and I don't know what happened to that guy, but he made about like 5 or 6 videos, and 2 or 3 of them were really good, and he was talking about being a poem purist, and I always liked. Excuse me, I've been drinking too much coffee this morning. Keep having gas from that. I always loved his take on, or thought that his take was very, very succinct. In that, I don't think he was right about everything about being a poem purist, because I think that's kind of a rabbit hole in itself. I think you have to be careful about this poem purist stuff, but by the same token, Forrest Fenn in the early interview, especially this New Zealand one, Forrest Fenn says specifically, he says you only need the poem and a good map. And that's it. He even says in that interview, the guy asks him, and Forrest Fenn categorically says, do you need the book? The contents of the stories in the book? And he says, no. It's really not going to help you. He said there's like a couple of hints that are just like not even really hints. And so that goes to the poem purist thing. So, staying on topic, is that Forrest Fenn says you need to decipher the clues and figure out what they mean. And oh, that was my point about the poem purist, is that he made the point is that there's virtually no way, or it's very difficult to get traction on this poem. There's no We're given very little of a manual. We're giving no manual. In fact, we have no contextual way to gain any kind of traction on the poem. And I think those were similar to his words, and he's absolutely right, and that stuck with me, is that there's no toehold. There's no, like, any kind of a puzzle, or a treasure hunt, or any kind of a riddle. I mean, sometimes you can get like a little piece of traction on it. I mean, even when they decipher hieroglyphics from Egyptian pyramids that are 2,500 years old or older, 3 or 4 thousand years old. I mean, they were able to get a toehold on just one little meaning of something, and then from there, they're able to start kind of doing backward regressive analysis on, okay, this is what a bird with looks, thing, the symbol of a bird means this, because we figured it out from somewhere else. But the problem with Forrest Fenn's poem is that there is no reference, there's no manual, there's nothing to compare it to, there's no, I mean, and then the guy is telling you that You need to use your imagination. Whoa, I mean that's a real problem because you're telling me to figure out the clues, I have to use my imagination. I mean, if people use their imagination and you have four people laying on a summer day on a knoll on a hill on the grass and looking at clouds go by, and I see, a cloud as, a bird, and you see the cloud as Easter bunny, and the other person sees doesn't see anything but a cloud. So, and we're using our imagination. So the point is you could have 100 people looking at the same cloud, and you're going to get 100 different answers, and none of them could be right because it was Forrest Fenn's imagination. So I'm still trying to figure out that imagination thing. Um, and it could be the kind of thing that when, if somebody figures it out, or if Forrest Fenn, actually sat down and divulged it to you, he'd be like, beginning where warm waters halt means this. And then you'd be like, and he explains it to you, and then you'd say, oh, that totally makes sense. If you had just given me like a little bit more information, or maybe a lot more. Um, so going back to this, and boy, can I get off track, is that decipher the clues, okay, and figure out what they mean. And and I think maybe not. Maybe my little going off about that thing about the imagination. I think that this could be one of the core kind of answers. And I think the what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to figure out some kind of of a of some kind of like reasonable starting point. You know, after tried many different ways and everything, including throwing darts at the thing, so to speak. Maybe that'll work. Just put it up, post it on the wall, and literally throw darts at it. I don't know how that's gonna help, but again, he's saying you need to decipher the clues. Okay, that's part of this compound sentence, and then you need to figure out what they mean. So, what that says to me is that it's a twofer. There's two parts to how you have to try and understand this. Now, another thought I had was that if you read the first sentence that he says is the first clue, it's interesting that when he was talking about how to solve the poem, he uses a compound sentence with the word and the first clue is a compound. Begin it where warm waters halt, and take it in the canyon down. I mean, is he maybe trying to tell us that the first sentence, the first part of the sentence, begin it where warm waters halt, is this, and he keeps saying, oh, this is the other part, he says first, begin it where warm waters halt. If you do not have that, you do not have anything. And if you can follow the clues in the poem, they will take you to the treasure chest. And that kind of goes to my other point about, which I had spoke about before, was that if you look up the definition of, one of the definitions of clues is that clues are, it goes back to this story from Greek mythology, is that this guy goes into a maze and he slays the Minotaur, and then he has to use the clues to find his way back out of the maze. And clues are also, can be thought of as like a string, which, and so my point with that is that, and Forrest has said that the clues are sequential. Sequential would be one thing after another, but I'm saying that I think that it implies that you need one thing. You cannot figure out the second thing without the first thing. You have to have the first thing to figure out the second thing, and you cannot figure out the third thing without the first thing and the second thing, and sequentially on and on, right? You need to have the first, the second, and the third thing to figure out the fourth thing, which explains the reason why he's saying that as you figure out more of the clues, the easier it'll get, because maybe there's a pattern, or just, and so that is, I'm wondering if that is a giveaway of this thing, of what the real answer is. And why would he say also, and this again is from the New Zealand interview from 2013, is he says, if I could find it here in my notes. Oh, he also says, no one's going to trip over this thing. It's hidden, not buried. But he says that, and I know we've said that before in other interviews, but he says something about that once you figure out what they mean, because you're going to be able to go straight to it. I think he said something about, I didn't write that down, that the person who figures it out will go directly to it, and they'll have no hesitation. They'll know exactly where they're going. So, backing up some more here and focusing in on just decipher the clues and figure out what they mean, which is a two-part thing. We need to decipher them, which means, which could mean that they're encrypted, but decipher could also imply that there's some trick to finding to I mean, if you have to decipher something, and and if you think about it, there's a lot of poems. There's a famous poem about the road less traveled, and most poems are like that. That you have to kind of read through them. Some of the really there's some very clever poems where, I mean, you when you read them, you kind of after you read it, you think to yourself, what the heck does that mean? And you really have to go through, and there's some tricks in poem reading or in the field of poetry where you have to understand that there are allegories, which would be a story about another story. I believe an allegory is where you take somebody else's story and you kind of repeat the story, or you tell it in a new way, but kind of the story is the same idea. Like, would be about this guy who slays the Minotaur, right? The story about that he has to go through this maze and slay the dragon. Now, if you watch Harry Potter, I mean, that story of the Minotaur is from Greek mythology. I mean, it is at least a couple of thousand years old. I think it's from the Iliad or something like that. And the thing is that if you watch Harry Potter, it's virtually the same story. Is that Harry Potter has to go through a maze of challenges, and in the end, what does he do? He slays the snake or the dragon. It's the same thing. Slays it, right? Now I'm sort of mixing that up. I mean, and the question is, do you need the clues to move forward? In the case of like Harry Potter, he needed the clues to work his way through the maze of challenges, and in the end, he had enough information and ability that he was able to slay the dragon in the end. It has been noted by a lot of other people too, and I'm wondering, like I was quoting, going back to like Illinois Ghost, is he makes a point, and I've heard this before. I've heard this notion and read it on Reddit threads where people have maybe they got part of it right. Is what they're saying is I almost wonder if it's backwards, that we have been given the location first, and that you have to work your way back, which sounds stupid, but maybe not, because maybe it's the other way around where you're given, how do you say that, you're actually given the actual place up front, but it's meaningless without having those other clues. And so that could be another reason why this thing is could be why people are so frustrated and can't figure this thing out, is because the the clue, and I've heard people ask this question multiple ways, was is that, well, why couldn't you just figure out the ninth clue if they are sequential, and like the ninth clue gets you to where you want to be, then to hell with all the other clues. I mean, if that ninth clue just says this location, then what do you need the other eight clues for? But it could be the other way around, is that, that first, the clue that you need, the first clue is really the actual location.